Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar session, Making Composable Architectures Work at Any Scale. Before I introduce our awesome panel of speakers today, just a few housekeeping items. Should you have any questions throughout the duration of the session, feel free to enter them into the Q&A section or the chat session we'll be monitoring. And if we can get to them mid-presentation, we will, but rest assured we will definitely get to them by the end of the session, if not. We will also be sharing the on-demand recording of this in the next day or so. So if there's anything that you want to double click into or want to hear again or share with your colleagues, you will have the on-demand recording at your fingertips. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Forrester Senior Analyst Joe Cicman and Sonia Kirill, Product Marketing at Contentstack. Joe, I will pass it over to you to kick it off.
All right, thanks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Joe Cicman, Senior Analyst here at Forrester Research, and I cover the tech behind digital experience platforms, marketplaces, and B2B e-commerce. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what you need to deliver digital experiences, making composable architectures work at any scale. And I'm going to put that into context to help you understand how it relates to your digital strategy so that you can understand its value. And with that, let's begin. I haven't slipped on ice in 35 years. By day, I'm Senior Analyst with Forrester Research, but in the evenings and weekends, I'm Joe Cicman, the BMX rider. Riding bikes like this takes a lot of balance. And when I'm competing, I'm judged on how innovative and challenging my tricks are. Now, I build my own bikes, I select each part, and sometimes I even modify those parts. But I also practice a lot, and my coach is a 3-time X Games champ. So there's no amount of money that a beginner can spend on their parts to outride me. And it's similar with delivering digital experiences. You don't get to where you need to be if you spend money on tech without comparable investment in skill building and a network of expert partners. Being great takes training to not lose your balance, that balance between what benefits your customers and what your firm values. And having digital skills is important because the new connected consumer poses a challenge for brands. Digital business pros like you need to understand how your customers connect across 3 dimensions: devices, platforms, and channels, and then map your portfolio of experiences so that you're present where your customers are. And the model for thinking through your portfolio of experiences is something that we call the 3D connected consumer. So 3 dimensions, devices, platforms, and channels now define how consumers are connected. And brands need to serve their consumers wherever they are in these complex ecosystems. You need to take a fresh look at how your customers connect as you craft your technology and platform portfolios. And that's because customers use combinations of platforms, devices, and channels that many firms don't support. So you need to understand your customers' digital ecosystems in order to map your portfolio of experiences to how your particular customers connect. And that's not a trivial endeavor. That's because customer journeys are not simple and brands aren't in control of how the customer goes through that journey. Your digital experience platform is how you deliver experiences to support buyer journeys that are nonlinear and in the buyer's control. And the talent that you employ to build these journeys, your practitioners, well, they need the flexibility built into their tools because they don't have time to constantly rely on developers. Now, this isn't just about better employee experience. Great customer experience leads to business growth. So this is the formula behind Forrester's CX Index, which quantifies the business benefit of having a loyal customer. It calculates the potential revenue from improved retention, enrichment, and advocacy loyalty. So for example, customers with excellent experiences have a higher likelihood to recommend and to recommend to many more people. So getting customer experience right leads to loyalty, which is retention, enrichment, and advocacy, and that drives business growth. But it's difficult to make something simple. When you deliver great experiences to your customers, they feel that it's simple. But in fact, it's very complex for you to do that. Consumers and business buyers alike seek convenience. They don't always want to visit you, even virtually, to engage with your brand, and nor do they want to fumble through unwieldy app experiences. So brands need to lighten the cognitive load on their customers by removing friction from their experiences. And to do that, brands need to do three things, which we're going to step through now. So the first thing that brands need to do is take a page from the banking playbook. See, banks realized decades ago that they couldn't just put their ATMs at bank branches if they wanted to reach new customers. They needed to put them in airports, in grocery stores, malls, and gas stations. And the same applies to digital. Consumers already use iPhones. They already use Google Maps. They already talk to Alexa. So brands need to place their services appropriately. Brands need to meet their customers where they are. Now, the second thing that brands need to do is offer choice. Consumers use more than one channel to complete the same task, depending on their context. So if a consumer is riding a bus to work in the morning and maybe she types phrases or touches icons to navigate through her song playlist in order to avoid disturbing other passengers. But if she's driving to work and has to be hands-free, well, she may use voice to accomplish the same task. Brands need to give customers a choice of channels. And the third thing that brands need to do is not fall behind. And the cost of delighting customers can be high, and the first movers bear that burden of teaching customers new tricks. But more often than not, your customers' expectations in digital are set by an experience outside your industry. For example, consumers expect the same process transparency for an auto insurance claim as they do for a fast food order. Digital business pros like you need to examine comparable processes or ideas outside of your company. Brands need to keep pace with or even stay ahead of customer expectation.
So Joe, we call this webinar Making Composable Architectures Work at Any Scale. And now we're talking about brand and customer experiences. What? We have architecture diagrams and API connectors and all that sort of stuff. What are you seeing? And I'm sort of let the witness here deny. What are you seeing as the as the motivators for going composable in the first place?
I work with a variety of Forrester clients, and I interview a variety of enterprises in my research. And I guess to maybe caricaturize this or simplify it is, if you have a digital strategy that is, I don't want to say less sophisticated, but pretty common, there are options for you to get that stuff out of the box. But if you want to be really differentiated, there are no options for those strategies out of the box. And so that's where Composable comes in, because your options are to buy something, tear it all apart and then rebuild it versus building it sort of chunks at a time. One of the questions I always had was, is composing from scratch really, really difficult? And I'm not convinced that it necessarily is. I reviewed a number of entries from the Mock Alliance competition, and one thing that struck me was how many of the teams who were new to mock technologies, how quickly they spun up sites. And one of the things that I heard repeatedly was how the teams didn't necessarily know the ins and outs of the individual products when they started, but they understood how to integrate them. And when I looked at the stacks that they used, they maybe had like 2 or 3, mock vendors, and then they all had a whole list of AWS services like API gateways, eventing, stuff like that. And so they were using what they knew from cloud native development to put these composed vendors to use.
And the simplicity of doing that is really, really beautiful. Now that you mentioned the Mock Alliance, it reminds me of a research that the Mock Alliance published earlier this year. And it said that 79% of digital leaders are looking to go composable. And when they went into the motivation, I personally was very surprised that less than 10%, it was a minute amount, went composable because of cost. All of them went into composable because they were looking to up their customer experience. And actually, even in B2B responses, the business, the customers in the businesses. And the second driver was speed and how quickly they could launch faster. And that's to your point. I was also very impressed with the Mock Alliance Award results and the Hackathon before too, where in a matter of 2-3 weeks, fantastic results can be achieved that when I did legacy, it just wasn't possible at all. You couldn't dream of doing that.
Yeah, you have to manage this tech for flexibility, not for efficiency. There are efficiencies as well that you can get from it.
Oh, yeah. That's the second thing. And we're doing this for speed and for customer experience. But by the way, we launched faster than anticipated, and the project was under budget. How beautiful is that, right?
Right.
Where do those efficiencies come from?
So if you look at this legacy tech, a lot of that stuff was built before there were public frameworks. And so what you had was proprietary frameworks that took a long time to learn, and they weren't necessarily transferable across all the platforms. These new software products were built to interoperate over, APIs, events. They're architected in a way that is very familiar to anyone who does any type of cloud native development.
Tell us a little bit more about what those composable architectures at scale look like.
You'll see an awful lot of, if I update content here, it throws an event that goes to whatever search engine, wherever else. And you do that with in your catalog, in the commerce stuff. And so you have kind of these event-based architectures. All of these things are open with open APIs. A lot of them have GraphQL such that your devs can hit one endpoint, and sometimes even it'll fan out to other services on the back end. So very similar to what you would do with like a back end for front end type of architecture. But everything that I just described is not proprietary to how you would do it for content management systems or for commerce systems. This goes well beyond the domain specific stuff. And this is just how you architect stuff in the cloud. That's the cloud native side of it. And I think that's where companies devs get an awful lot of efficiency, because they already know how to develop in cloud native. And now they just have domain specific functionality behind those APIs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen that too. What else did you bring today, Joe?
All right, let's keep going.
Let's keep going.
So every time customers are exposed to an improved digital experience, their expectations for all digital experiences are set to a new and higher level. And more often, your customers' expectations in digital are set by an experience outside of your industry. So now let's turn our attention to the technology. The technology on its own doesn't magically make you win, no differently than owning free weights will make you physically fit. Now, they're just an ingredient, and so they're just a means to achieve your goal. And that goal is your digital strategy. So start by understanding your customers and crafting journey maps that call out the digital interactions that are meaningful. Then score each of those digital interactions along two dimensions: benefit to the customer and value to your firm. And then prioritize those digital interactions based on the scores. So think of this as a stacked rank backlog. Then select the right technology to bring those digital interactions to life. Now, more often than not, taking a loosely coupled approach to the tech that powers those digital interactions will result in you having more flexibility. And that flexibility means you can deploy and iterate those digital interactions faster with less cost and with less technical complexity. The pandemic reinforced how technology improves the economics and capabilities of every business. And using new digital capabilities, it's 10 times cheaper and faster to adapt your workforce, engage customers, create offerings, harness partners, and operate your business even among uncertainty. Digitally advanced firms use technology at the core to create customer value. To build and deliver innovative digital experiences, you will buy technology that is more componentized, and you'll buy from more and more vendors that specialize and have built their products to interoperate. Bundled technologies often underwhelm as a trade-off for easier buying. Now, I explain headless commerce by looking at it from a packaging perspective as well as from an architectural perspective. And that's because every commerce platform has APIs, and you can do headless with them. Now, if you are a headless commerce vendor, you might include a decoupled front end with your API first commerce product. The front end probably isn't world-class, but it does provide a convenient way for brands to buy the tech that they need to start doing decoupled headless commerce. But that front end is probably more akin to the cufflinks that come free with your shirt. They're good enough in a pinch, but as you become more sophisticated, you really want to buy standalone cufflinks. So let's keep going with some metaphors. And let's illustrate the trade-off between convenient packaging and having access to the exact tech you need to fulfill your digital strategy, keeping in mind that your digital strategy will evolve. So in the example that we're looking at, if the formats change, you're out of luck. If your audience quadruples, you're out of luck. If one part of it breaks, or if one part of it falls behind the times, then everything breaks and falls behind the times. But in the world of microservices, how fine-grained is too fine-grained? Well, I've observed a religious debate about microservices. So up next, I'm going to talk to you about the externally observable results of the two architectures so that you don't get wrapped around the axles arguing with someone whose interests align with you staying on a monolith. There are 5 key properties to these architectures. First, monoliths make you choose between upgrading and innovating, whereas microservices are versionless so that all of your spend goes towards innovation. Second, monoliths have complex scaling, and customers sometimes have to inform their vendor ahead of big traffic driving campaigns. Third, the vendors of monoliths themselves have slow velocity. So don't look at their roadmap. Instead, look at their release notes to see exactly how much innovation they've been delivering over the past 18 months. Fourth, those monoliths rarely have best-in-class capabilities compared to other standalone vendors. Search is a great example of this. And fifth, monoliths often result in a high cost of talent. That's not just hourly rate, how hard it could be to find those people to work on the product's proprietary frameworks, how long it takes to train someone up, and how productive they actually are. Around this time last year, I published my findings from the wave on digital experience platforms. And technical architectures aside, today, companies buy digital experience parts from multiple vendors and they implement them over time. And even when a company goes all in with a single vendor, it doesn't implement all the parts at the same time. That means your digital experiences are delivered, if even just temporarily, in a multi-vendor, multi-product stack. And in a world like this, interoperability is imperative. But all too often, the burden of integration is your responsibility. So the question in my mind becomes, if you must write code to integrate parts of a vendor's portfolio, what kind of code would you like to write? The vendors in the DXP wave were racing to simultaneously modernize their technology and to simplify the way the parts interoperate. So as a result of these trends, buyers of digital experience platforms should look for providers that offer pre-built integrations to more digital experience parts, that prioritize the practitioner experience, that elevate testing and optimization to a first-class capability, and have an API-first cloud-native offering. So now let's look at another wave. This past April, I published my findings from the B2B commerce solutions wave. 2 generations of technology sourced by 2 types of technology buyers define today's market. The older vendors originally built their products with monolithic architectures and offer many mature but very slowly evolving functions that have been battle-hardened over 15 years. And the newer vendors built their products with cloud-native architectures that offer less mature but very quickly evolving functions as APIs that are designed for businesses to compose into tailored solutions. Now, the digitally mature firms, the digitally mature enterprises, have the culture and development skills to take advantage of the modern vendors. The less digitally mature firms, those that continue to delay modernization, well, they risk being tied to outdated vendor offerings. Here's the rub. The modern vendors aren't function mature, and most of the function mature stalwarts have antiquated architecture that impedes innovation. So as a result of these trends, buyers of B2B commerce solutions should look for providers that are built on modern cloud native architecture, that have modern ISV partners, that have modern service partners. So the thing about service partners is if you don't have the right culture or tech talent, agencies and systems integrators can help you transform. They can also provide consulting to help you formulate that great innovative digital strategy that'll have a meaningful impact on your customers and your business. Okay, 4th, that prioritize the practitioner experience. And then 5, that align to future fit principles that govern smart investments. So on that front, a future fit investment framework powers new business models through technology-driven innovation. It follows an iterative process. It uses early results to justify further investment, and it relies on external and pilot data. So select a provider that offers trials that enable your teams to learn the capabilities by prototyping and iterating on their own, rather than sitting passively through slide presentations from the sales team.
There's a lot to unpack there. So you mentioned integration a few times now. That's always what I hear in conversations, that big elephant in the room. When you're coming from a monolithic world, and let's face it, most enterprises are, then integration is always the big scary thing. I often hear, oh, Composable is too complex because look how hard it is to integrate stuff now. Look how hard it is to extend functionality now. Oh no, what if we have to do that with 5 different vendors in the mix? What do you advise?
Yeah, I think the way I'd frame it is, on the topic of complexity of the support, what I've observed is that it has more to do with the newness of the architecture than the architecture itself, and more specifically about the newness of the architecture in the eyes of the team that's going to be operating the tech. So for example, some of the longtime vendors in the wave had recently done some refactoring, but their clients weren't entirely used to that. And even some vendors with architectures that had been out in the field for a long time, were the source of some long-standing gripes from longtime customers. So Mock and Cloud Native offers a trade-off. You get performance, a constant stream of new capabilities, no need to upgrade at the cost of learning Cloud Native development. But let's face it, we live in a cloud world already, and that's just something you're going to have to learn anyway. By metaphor, remember converting from a BlackBerry physical keyboard to an iPhone soft keyboard? It was a change, it felt disruptive, but it was the next paradigm in computing. And today, you're not going to go back. And so, the other thing I advise with clients is manage your digital experiences as products, not as projects. And that's a very different, that's part of the whole mind shift of going into cloud native, being able to do truly continuous integration, continuous development. But under those circumstances, you've got like site reliability engineers anyway. It's just part of how you're building solutions. So I steer clients towards thinking of this as doing cloud native development, and that just part of what it means to do that.
Do you know what I find curious is that in a lot of people's minds, cloud native software and SaaS especially, still translates to that's a black box kind of tool that I, as a practitioner, as an architect or developer, actually cannot extend, and I have to live with what I get. And actually, on that note, and sorry to round that up, that's not the SaaS 2.0, maybe 4.0 version, of course, to your earlier point that we live in today. It's designed for that interoperability. We have 2 questions that I think fit in really well here, Joe. How different is composable architecture from decoupling a monolith via microservices architectures? I'm super curious what you're going to say to that.
Yeah, okay. The whole decoupling a monolith, that's the whole strangler pattern, where you go in, you build interfaces around the thing in monolith, pull it out. That's extraordinarily difficult work to do. I've worked with some SIs that have practices at doing that for all sorts of legacy apps. When I look at how many legacy vendors have been able to do that, very few and to a very small degree. It's extraordinarily difficult work. And so the other way I would say this is, look, if you're working on a monolith, most of these monoliths have frameworks. Now, I'll say show of hands, but I know I'm not going to see the hands. How many of you just decided to make a JDBC call instead? There's a
because you just can't cope with the proprietary stuff.
Because you just can't cope with it, or the framework's not going that, there's a bunch of latency through the framework, and you say, I can just hit the database right now. So in these monoliths, there's lots of that stuff. I mean, it would be one thing to say, take the framework and just decouple it. It's another thing to say, take the framework, decouple it, and all of these other connections that people made because they were cheating the frameworks. That's extraordinarily difficult work. Now, the other way to do it is to start fresh with those cleanly architected boxes as it is, and then rewire them together. The wiring is very different. I mentioned earlier, this could be subscribing to events that would kick off an update to the search engine. And even when you get to like the front end as a service to the back end, sometimes it's just a single URI that you would plug in. Put your eyes on how much simpler it is to tie these things together, because it is not like the myriad of connections that you would have to pull apart if you were going to do a decoupling. Loosely coupling two components is different than decoupling components.
That's right. I've also often seen the narrative of we have decoupled is a good way for vendors to camouflage the monolith under the hood and sell that best of both worlds idea that is typically just a really rough wake-up call after the initial implementation, isn't it? Yeah. Before we look into, so what do I build? What do I buy, Joe? Another question from the audience about what percentage of major enterprises have embraced composable tech. So when we say embraced, let's assume have done it all the way. No, maybe halfway. Do I need to define that?
I would say I'll start to take a bite out of this sort of one at a time, because I don't have a high level, I don't have a definitive percentage number to give you. But what I would say is I see a lot of enterprises that have done the headless thing. And it's actually pretty common. It's not the same as Composable. If you see a brand that has an iPhone app, there you go, that's headless. Because by definition, the app lives on your phone and it's making API calls to the back end. So that there's an awful lot of that headless stuff happening today. Composable is a little bit different because for the most part, you have to start with composed or composable pieces. And so, one proxy for getting a measure on that is just comparing the customer counts between vendors. I also, as an analyst, I look at the counts of new logos. I ask myself, how many people who do not currently have an e-commerce presence are buying a piece of legacy tech, or how many of them are replatforming to yet another piece of legacy tech. What I do see is, hey, I've had this piece of legacy tech for a while. Maybe I'll kick the can down the road, or I'll continue to innovate on it. But the replatforming is an inevitability, and there appears to be, they're not going to replatform old tech onto old tech.
Yeah, the reason I struggled with asking the question is, what do we mean by embraced? So the 79% we mentioned earlier have embraced the paradigm of and the notion of we have to go there, but I typically see phases in the sense of we start decoupling the different heads, we go into content, we go into commerce, we add search, we add personalization, and it is a gradual process. And in all fairness, certain elements of the holistic architecture aren't even there yet to be composed. There's very few ERPs in there, very few, auditing tools and so on that would actually meant in there. We have a clarification from the original poster. By embrace, actually seriously looking into or making a commitment to go there. Then I have a figure from the Mark Alliance research for you. Across the major enterprises in the US, the UK, and Germany, the answer is 79%. I'm very pleased, Joe, that I have a concrete number now.
It's yes.
Build or buy is always a big decision, and I know you have an opinion on that as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you see that?
I would love to tell you a little bit about how I see it. We're going to take a little bit closer look at how you need to think differently about when working with modern technology. In the cloud, the traditional algebra of buy versus build doesn't work. And that's because of how modern software is written. Now, it turns out that pure buy doesn't exist, and pure build also doesn't exist. And this traditional build versus buy thinking underestimates the complexity and cost of package solutions, as well as the value of platforms and their ecosystems. And it overestimates the cost and complexity of modern custom development, as well as the similarities between firms. In the digital era, software is an expression of the business. So how should you think about customize? Well, that's when you buy a thing and you need the inner workings of the thing to work differently in order to match how you do business. So with the car example, Honda Civics are popular with the tuner crowd because of how modifiable they are. Now, how to think about composing. That is, you don't buy the mass manufactured discrete thing and then break it apart and change the way it works. Instead, you assemble the thing from specialty parts by putting those parts together in a way that optimizes for what you're trying to achieve. Some parts you might even create yourself, and then you assemble those parts into a whole. So again, when you're composing, you're buying parts and you're assembling them into a thing. So rather than a binary build versus buy choice, firms have a spectrum of delivery options, and in fact, they have for years. So excluding pure build, there's 5, not just 2, representing various combinations of purchased software and custom development. Now, new technologies, particularly cloud platforms and low-code tooling, new software design techniques like microservices and cloud native, new licensing like open source and pay-as-you-go APIs, and new development techniques like agile methods and continuous delivery drove this explosion in solution delivery options. And all of this evolution has driven massive changes to both packaged apps and custom development platforms. And this is the new reality of digital experiences. And this is why you need modern skills in order to take advantage of modern technology. So broaden this idea of composing beyond just your content experiences and apply it to all of your enterprise capabilities. An experience architecture serves customers in the moments they choose. The best investments for advancing customer interactions is with real-time visibility of the systems, platforms, and processes that affect the customer's experiences. And at a minimum, experience architecture includes the ecosystem of platforms that live in the cloud, is accessible over open APIs, includes high-performance data movement and storage, scales in performance, and it's set to increase development speed. So where is all this headed? Well, customer-obsessed brands that use an experience architecture create brand expressions that attract and adapt to customers the way those customers expect to be engaged. Traditional technology with the process silos creates seams that customers can feel as friction. And that's because companies without an experience architecture manage their technology for efficiency and cost, not effectiveness. An experience architecture built to enable uninhibited brand expression is how digital immigrants will be able to compete with digital natives that built their systems from the ground up. Now, you can't buy an experience architecture from a software vendor. It takes specialized capability to assemble it and then to practice the principles over time to evolve it. And that's capability that you develop through a combination of in-house talent and co-innovation partners. Cloud is just the latest technology shift, and you've navigated other technology shifts in your career before. So leverage partners to help you navigate your current organization through this most recent technology shift. Enterprise cloud leaders must power their organization using the right assortment of cloud platforms and partners. And advanced cloud stories are inspiring. We're seeing plenty of fantastic innovation, including Volvo innovating on autonomous vehicles on cloud platforms, BP achieving sustainability goals with cloud, and Lowe's dealing with the unprecedented e-commerce traffic amid the pandemic by accelerating its cloud migration plans. It's true that many enterprises are still early in their cloud journeys, but a delayed cloud strategy has an opportunity cost, like lost revenue, lost productivity. Every enterprise should find the right assortment of partners to help it accelerate. And one key aspect to understand about cloud partners is that partners can accelerate and enhance your skills. Although there are lots of new ways that partners can co-innovate with your company, the basics still hold true. Your major MSPs, consultancies, and SIs offer cloud services to help access, compose, and orchestrate, which is plan, build, and run. Many enterprises use partners to fill skill gaps, to accelerate with tools, which the partners call accelerators, to provide best-in-class experience and knowledge, and then also to give an outside-in perspective. So both platform players and services firms can help supplement your cloud team and even become part of your cloud center of excellence to help you get moving quickly and safely. And so one final word of encouragement, as both an analyst and a BMX rider, I can assure you that you are not alone in taking this ambitious journey. Every master started as a beginner. They made gradual, continuous improvement. So work on your game, work on your skills, and remember, you've gone through big change before. It's just like riding a bike. And with that, I'm going to throw it back over to Sonia.
Thank you, Joe. I love that this is a balance bike too. As a mom, I just need to say that's the best way to learn how to ride a bike, isn't it? So we got another question in through the private chat, which is a beautiful tee up. And the question is, obviously one solution doesn't fit all. What are scenarios where Composable may be more of a headache than that it actually solves what you're looking to do? So the barriers, and you've touched on the integration one that I typically hear are three. The first one is this idea of, oh no, how am I going to actually initially plug together the different tools? And to answer the question of what is a headache scenario, well, yes, there are APIs that you can use to custom build integrations, but to your point earlier, Joe, what you really want to look for is pre-built integrations, because what you don't want to do and don't have to do anymore is reinvent the wheel for every time you plug in, say, a content management system and a search vendor. That's just insane. That's not a good use of your time. So look for those vendors that have mature marketplaces, not like, here's an integration, here's the code repository, go download and do it yourself. I'm actually talking about install, next API key, done. Otherwise, you might run into a headache because you also don't want to have to maintain all that integration glue all the time yourself. Is that something you hear a lot too, Joe?
Oh, definitely. This is something that I called out in the waves, which was look for platforms that have pre-integration to other, best of breed vendors. It saves so much time.
Yes. Yeah. And it saves time to actually do on fun stuff, like thinking about how to make it better for your customers and being creative and imaginative. Now, the second barrier you actually didn't address just now, but I hear that a lot. What if something goes wrong and I need to get in touch with 5 different vendors to figure out where it actually went wrong? And especially if you're used to some person somewhere in your organization having a support ticket access, and that guy is just out on holiday, right? You're stuck in the old support model. So my recommendation is always look for vendors that do composable and actually have like in-app support and chat so you get answers quickly. And for those who have cross-vendor support programs, and Contentstack pioneered that last year with a number of other composable vendors, meaning if you as a customer have a challenge, all the vendors that serve you and are part of that program come together to help you. That's really, really important. The more you compose, the more you need to make sure you have a partner relationship and not the old school vendor relationship. Is that something you see too, Joe?
Yeah, I do. In fact, when I talk to SIs, they end up doing that. Some clients will have that function in-house, but again, if you're just getting started, wow, that's just another thing that you have to build out. So yeah, I am encouraged to see more commercial offerings to solve this support perceived headache, for sure.
There's a black swan though. I actually only recently learned what a black swan is. So for those of you who also don't know what the black swan is, so those two were the elephants in the room. The black swan is apparently something that's there, but you are not aware that it is there. Apparently there was a big debate in Britain many hundred years ago that black swans don't exist. And then someone found one and everybody was like, oh my God. So is that a fair explanation of the black swan, Joe?
Spot on.
Fantastic. And you mentioned it a little bit in your conversations. What I find interesting is companies going from monolith to composable to Mark, they typically obsess about the integration because that was the hard bit. And then they are concerned about the support because that's kind of obvious in a multi-vendor world. But the actual challenge of composability is not the initial integration and plugging some APIs together. It's actually the interoperability ongoing as you do your business as usual, as you launch your campaign and you need to trigger 5, 6 different events as you launch a new product or just create a new product. And you need to update maybe the detail content in your content management system, the assets in the digital asset management system, the search index, of course. Ooh, and there is some merchandising rule that needs to get fired as well. That's typically what happens in a monolith because it is so monolithic and it's just different buttons in the same interface to press, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very possible to get into a really gnarly swivel chair situation when you go all best of breed.
Yeah, but luckily there is a solution now. So we have just launched Automation Hub at Contentstack, and I'm insanely excited about Automation Hub. Essentially, what it is in a nutshell is a visual rule builder that you can use even as a business user. You don't even need to be an architect or a developer to define the process flow between all the pieces in your composable architecture in a really simple action, trigger and action model. So rather than having to find a developer that needs to write code for scripting data and content flow between tool A and tool B, you can go into Contentstack. This is native in our app, and you just activate the connectivity, let's say with your search engine, and you say every time I publish a new piece of content, automatically update the search index. Now that's pretty straightforward, right? That doesn't sound like it's all that much value add. But what if you want to launch the new product and you create the product, you maybe want to go global and you have to translate it? Then you need to go into your translation tool and press translate here. You need to approve that the translation happens, and you need to wait, hopefully not miss when the translation actually comes back. Everyone's like, oh, waiting isn't hard. Waiting is actually super hard in the technology world. Then you need to update all of your entries and product information across Contentstack and whatever e-commerce engine you use at the same time. You want to update the workflow status. Oh, and we need to get the right assets from our DAM as well. Oh, you got to go to yet another tool, right? Then you need to make sure that product data is synced and live. You need to update your search index, and you probably want to notify some people as well. All of those are manual steps that you need to take in the right order. And in a headache scenario, to our audience's question, possibly across a lot of different interfaces as well. So you, instead of having a smooth, fast rollout, you have a clip chart, and you better do it right and don't do any mistakes along the way. Automation Hub solves exactly this headache and beautifully connects all of those flows and allows you, as like a business ops manager or the MarTech person, to even change them after you have initially set them. And when this is important, all of that runs on cloud native infrastructure in the back. That is something that is often forgotten, that when you need to make the glue in between the systems, you also need to take care of where that glue lives and where it is hosted. Contentstack now takes care of all of that for you. So it's secure, it's fast, it's always up and running. And that is so amazing that that marketer that wanted to launch that product is getting a promotion after using Automation Hub. The important part of that, and let's talk a little bit about the urgency, Joe. We got the question before, how many people are en route to Composable? You said, if you don't want to do digital sameness, then you need to go Composable. Is that a someday, eventually conversation? Can brands afford to not go Composable, to not innovate digitally anymore?
If you are a brand in a monopoly situation, then you probably can wait it out until you get disrupted. But if you are in an industry, and many people are, and that is subject to external disruption, you are going to be called to defend your turf, and you don't want to be caught underskilled at that point. And so probably rolling the dice to rest on your laurels.
Ooh, so now is the better choice?
I would say now is a better choice than later in indeterminate time, for sure.
Fantastic. Two quick questions, Joe. Can you recommend any studies or reports that show some metrics around composable architecture?
I believe you had one earlier.
The Mark Alliance research, for sure, talks a lot about the benefits, and there's a number of fantastic case studies there. How about from the Forrester side?
I would. That's a great question. I did a piece called "Forget Build versus Buy: Your Choices, Customize or Compose." And I am always available to Forrester clients for inquiry to dig in very specifically on their particular problems, and we work together and we apply the research to their circumstances.
Beautiful. And then a very simple question for me: the content that goes to the search index tool comes from Contentstack, correct? Correct. And if it doesn't yet, that means you're not a Contentstack customer, and you should totally change that. And then there is more questions in the chat. Yes, there will be a recording of this presentation that we'll share with you all later. Joe, thank you for all the random questions that I've added in between. This was really, really lovely to speak to you. Thank you all for joining here today, and I'll see you live in 3D in London next week, Joe. Looking forward to that.
So am I.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.